The room was quiet, but Keanu Reeves could hear his own heart beating as he stood near the doorway. The world outside was moving fast, but in that moment everything slowed down. He had not seen Sandra Bullock in years, and now fate had brought them to the same place again. The silence carried a weight, as if the past was waiting to walk in with her. He remembered the laughter, the shared moments, the kindness in her eyes. He wondered if she remembered too, or if time had hidden it all under layers of life and distance. When Sandra finally entered, her smile was soft, almost hesitant, like she too was unsure if the years had built a wall between them. Keanu took a deep breath, steadying himself. He thought of all the people who had come and gone in his life, but her presence was different. It was like meeting a piece of his own history. The years did not erase the bond. They only made the memory more powerful. Her eyes met his, and for a second it felt as if nothing had changed. They both paused, caught between the past and the present. As they walked toward each other, the air filled with unspoken words. People around them noticed the quiet tension, the way their eyes seemed to carry more than greetings. Sandra was the first to speak, her voice gentle but carrying a hidden tremor. She said she had not expected to see him here, not like this, not at this time. Keanu smiled softly, and his smile carried the weight of everything he could not say in that moment. He felt the urge to ask about her life, her happiness, her struggles, but he also knew that real connections take time to unfold again. The room grew smaller as they sat together. The noise of the world faded and memories began to surface. They spoke about the past, not in grand detail, but in small glimpses that revealed how much they still remembered. A shared joke about a long-ago film set, a memory of late-night talks, the laughter that once healed their tired hearts. It was not about nostalgia. It was about realizing that kindness and respect never truly fade. Sandra admitted that in difficult times, she often remembered how calm and patient he always was. Keanu, humbled by her words, nodded quietly, knowing she too had given him strength in ways she never knew. But as the conversation deepened, there was a moment of silence that carried something heavier. Sandra's eyes lowered and Keanu sensed a story untold. She spoke of years when loneliness had crept into her life, when the spotlight felt more like a cage than a blessing. She confessed that sometimes she wished she had someone to remind her that she was more than her struggles. Keanu listened carefully, his eyes filled with quiet compassion. He did not interrupt. He did not offer easy answers because he knew true kindness meant simply being there, allowing the other person to feel seen. In return, Keanu shared his own truth. He spoke about nights when he sat alone, remembering people he had lost, the silence of birthdays spent without laughter, and the quiet battles with grief that never left him. Sandra listened, her heart aching for him. The world saw him as strong and untouchable, but here he allowed her to see the vulnerability behind his quiet smile. She reached across the table, resting her hand gently over his, and for the first time in years, he felt the warmth of friendship that carried no judgment, only understanding. As the day turned to evening, the light through the windows shifted to a golden glow. It painted their faces softly, like a reminder that even after storms, sunlight returns. They both realized that this meeting was no accident. It was life giving them a second chance to remember that respect, humility, and kindness are timeless. The happy memories they carried were not just in the past. They were seeds that could grow again, stronger than before. The world outside kept moving, but inside that moment, two souls reconnected, bound not by fame or fortune, but by the simple truth that kindness and respect create bonds that time cannot break. The evening after their reunion, Keanu walked alone down a quiet street. The air was cool. The city lights flickered like fading stars, and his thoughts would not leave him. He replayed every word Sandra had said, every expression on her face. It was as if the past had opened a door he thought would remain locked forever. He remembered the warmth in her laugh, the way she once looked at him with trust, and how he had always respected her strength. Yet there was also a sadness in her eyes he could not ignore, something she had carried silently through the years. The next day, fate tested them again. Sandra had invited him for coffee at a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. She chose that place because it was simple, far from cameras, far from curious eyes. When Keanu entered, he noticed she was already there, sitting near the window, looking out as if searching for something she could not find. He paused for a moment, watching her. She seemed strong yet fragile. He knew that even people who appeared unshakable often carried hidden storms inside. As he sat down, she smiled faintly, but her voice trembled when she spoke. She asked him if he ever thought about the choices they never made, the paths they never took. Keanu felt his chest tighten. He knew what she meant, though her words were wrapped in gentleness. He thought of how different their lives could have been if time and circumstances had aligned. He did not answer immediately because some truths are too heavy to be spoken quickly. Instead, he looked at her with a silence that carried honesty, and in that silence, she understood his heart. Their talk drifted into memories. Sandra recalled the nights when they worked together, how the long hours were softened by shared laughter. Keanu reminded her of the time they sat under studio lights, tired but unable to stop talking, as if the world had disappeared outside. They both laughed softly now, but beneath the laughter there was something unspoken, the acknowledgement that they had once been each other's safe place. But the cafe air grew heavier when Sandra revealed something deeper. She told him about moments in her life when she had been surrounded by people yet felt completely alone. She admitted she had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and times when the spotlight felt more like a prison. Her voice broke slightly when she said that there were nights she wished someone would simply sit with her in silence, without judgment, without expectation. Keanu felt a quiet ache in his chest. He wanted to reach across and tell her that he understood, that he too had felt the weight of solitude pressing on his shoulders. Then he opened his heart. He told her about birthdays he had spent in silence, dinners where the chair across from him stayed empty, and the grief of losing people he loved too soon. He confessed that sometimes he felt like he carried invisible wounds that no one could see. Sandra's eyes grew wet as she listened. She realized that behind his quiet strength was a man who had endured storms alone, a man who gave kindness to the world even when he had little left for himself. The moment between them grew still. It was not romance, not drama, but something purer. Two souls recognizing the pain in each other and quietly offering comfort. Sandra placed her hand on his again, not as an act of pity, but as a gesture of respect. She wanted him to know that she saw him, the real him, not the image the world created. Keanu looked into her eyes, and for a brief second, the years of distance vanished. As the hours passed, their talk shifted to dreams. Sandra said she had always wanted to escape the noise of the world and live quietly, somewhere peaceful. Keanu smiled, admitting he too longed for simplicity, for a life where kindness mattered more than fame. They laughed when they realized their dreams were not so different. It felt almost ironic. Two people known worldwide, searching for the kind of quiet happiness most people overlooked. Suddenly, Sandra's phone buzzed. Her expression changed as she read the message. Keanu noticed the way her face grew pale. She hesitated, but finally shared it with him. A close friend of hers was facing a difficult time, and she had been trying to help from afar. The message reminded her that life was fragile, that moments of peace were rare. She sighed, saying softly that she sometimes wondered if she had given enough of herself to the people who truly needed her. Keanu looked at her with calm strength. He told her that even the smallest act of kindness can heal someone's heart, even if it goes unseen. He reminded her that she had always carried light within her, and that light had touched more lives than she would ever realize. Sandra blinked back tears, because his words were not empty comfort. They were truth spoken by someone who understood the value of kindness. They left the cafe as the sun began to set, walking side by side through the quiet street. People passed them without realizing who they were, and for once, it felt freeing. Sandra laughed when a small child waved at her, and Keanu smiled softly, realizing that even in the simplest moments, there was beauty. That night, as Keanu sat alone, he thought about what had unfolded. This was no ordinary reunion. It was a reminder that life gives us second chances, not always to change the past, but to find meaning in the present. He knew their story was not over. It was only beginning to unfold again, filled with new memories, new challenges, and a new depth of understanding. The night after their quiet walk, Keanu could not sleep. He sat by the window of his apartment, staring at the city lights, lost in thought. His heart was calm yet restless, as if he knew something bigger was waiting ahead. Their reunion had stirred not only old memories, but also questions he had avoided for years. He asked himself if life was offering him a chance to heal, or if it was only a passing moment meant to remind him of what once was. Sandra, too, lay awake in her own home. She kept thinking about the way Keanu had listened without judgment, the way his silence felt safe, the way his words seemed to reach the corners of her heart that she had kept locked away. She realized that in a world full of noise, his presence was a rare quietness that gave her strength. Yet alongside this comfort, she also felt fear that opening up again might reopen old wounds she had carefully hidden. A few days later, Sandra invited Keanu to visit a place she loved. It was a small art gallery tucked inside an old building, not well known but filled with paintings that told stories of resilience, hope, and loss. When Keanu stepped inside, he was struck by the silence of the gallery. The paintings spoke louder than words. One painting showed a lone figure standing in the rain, holding a candle that refused to go out. Keanu stood in front of it for a long time. Sandra joined him, and she whispered that she loved this piece because it reminded her that even in storms, light survives. Keanu smiled softly, replying that it also reminded him of her. As they walked through the gallery, they found themselves speaking less and feeling more. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of recognition. They both knew that life had tested them in ways others could never fully understand. But their peaceful afternoon did not last long. Just as they were leaving, they were recognized by a small group of people. At first, it was harmless. A few smiles, a few whispers, but soon phones appeared, pictures were taken, and the moment of quiet slipped away. Sandra's expression tightened. She had always struggled with the pressure of being seen when she wanted to disappear. Keanu noticed her discomfort immediately. Without a word, he gently guided her out, shielding her from the crowd with a calm but protective presence. Once they were outside, away from the noise, Sandra stopped and took a deep breath. She thanked him, but there was a tremble in her voice. She admitted that sometimes she hated the spotlight, that it reminded her of how little privacy she truly had. Keanu nodded, saying he understood because he too had lived with that same burden. He confessed that sometimes he wished he could live a life where nobody knew his name, where he could simply walk down a street unnoticed. That honesty opened a deeper layer between them. Sandra looked at him, her eyes heavy with something unsaid. After a pause, she finally spoke. She told him about a time, years ago, when she almost walked away from everything, her career, her public life, because she felt the weight was crushing her. She said the only reason she stayed was because of the people who reminded her she still mattered. Keanu listened, his heart aching at the thought that the world almost lost her light. He told her quietly that her courage had inspired millions, even if she never realized it. The next day, Sandra surprised Keanu by calling him early in the morning. Her voice was calm but serious. She asked him if he would join her on a drive outside the city. She wanted to show him something important. Without hesitation, he agreed. The drive was long, the road winding through hills and fields. The silence between them was peaceful, filled with unspoken trust. Finally, they stopped near a small village. Sandra explained that she had been supporting a local school here for years, quietly and without publicity. She took him inside, where children ran with laughter, their eyes shining with hope. Keanu was moved deeply. He watched as Sandra bent down to talk with the children, her face glowing with warmth. In that moment, he saw a side of her the world rarely saw. Not the actress, not the star, but a woman who carried kindness like a hidden treasure. The head teacher of the school approached them and thanked Sandra for her help. Keanu stood silently, watching with admiration. When the children asked who he was, Sandra smiled and introduced him simply as a friend. The word friend struck Keanu's heart. It was simple, but it carried depth. As they left the school, Keanu felt a shift inside him. He realized that their reunion was more than chance. It was a reminder of what truly mattered: respect, kindness, and the courage to keep giving even when life felt heavy. Sandra's actions showed him that fame meant nothing compared to the joy of helping others. But as they drove back, clouds began to gather in the sky. A storm was coming, both in the weather and in their lives. Keanu could sense it, though he did not know yet what form it would take. Sandra grew quiet during the ride, her eyes lost in the distance. He wanted to ask what was troubling her, but he chose silence, trusting that when she was ready, she would share. That evening, as rain began to fall, Sandra finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost breaking. She told Keanu that she carried a regret, one that had haunted her for years. It was not about career, not about fame, but something personal, something fragile. She said she once walked away from someone who truly cared, because she was afraid of being hurt. And though life had moved on, the memory of that choice still followed her. Keanu listened, his heart heavy, realizing the depth of her confession. He wanted to tell her that regrets are not chains, that they are reminders of our humanity. But before he could speak, she looked into his eyes, as if searching for an answer he wasn't sure he had. In that moment, the storm outside seemed to mirror the storm inside their hearts. The rain fell harder, the thunder echoed, and the world felt charged with tension. This was no longer just a reunion of old friends. It was something more fragile, more complicated, and more powerful. It was the beginning of a journey neither of them expected, but both of them needed. The storm outside the window had not stopped. Rain tapped against the glass as if trying to remind them of the heaviness in the air. Keanu sat quietly, his eyes fixed on Sandra. Her confession still echoed inside his heart. She had spoken about regret, about walking away from someone who cared. And though she had not said his name, Keanu wondered if she was speaking about him. He wanted to ask, but fear held him back. Sometimes silence carried more truth than questions. Sandra leaned back in her chair, staring at the storm. Her voice was low when she finally said that life often gives people second chances, but not always in the way they expect. She admitted she was scared, that even though their reunion felt right, she feared it could vanish like a dream if she held on too tightly. Keanu felt a quiet ache. He had spent years teaching himself to let go of what life took from him, but now he wondered if this was the moment to hold on instead. A sudden flash of lightning filled the room, and the sound of thunder shook the walls. It was as if the storm itself was answering their silence. Sandra turned to him, her eyes glistening. She whispered that she had kept something from him, something she had wanted to share for years but never found the courage. Keanu's heart quickened. He leaned forward slightly, not pressing but waiting. Her words came slowly. She told him there was a letter she once wrote, a letter she never sent. It was written during a time when she felt lost and wished she could tell him everything she couldn't say aloud. But instead of giving it to him, she kept it hidden, afraid that it might change everything between them. She admitted that even now she wasn't sure if she was ready for him to read it. Keanu sat back, his mind spinning. The thought of a hidden letter stirred something deep inside him, curiosity, fear, and hope all at once. He gently told her that she didn't have to share it until she was ready. His voice was steady, calm, but his heart was racing. The night grew darker, the rain heavier, yet inside the room there was a fragile warmth. They spoke about life, about how both of them had learned to carry pain quietly. Sandra confessed that her biggest fear was being misunderstood, while Keanu admitted his greatest fear was being forgotten. The honesty between them made the air heavy but also freeing. They were no longer speaking as two stars remembered by the world, but as two souls who had walked through storms and still stood. The next morning, the storm had cleared. Sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the sky with shades of gold. Sandra called Keanu and asked him to meet her at a small park they both once visited many years ago. When he arrived, he found her sitting on a wooden bench under a large tree. In her hands, she held an old envelope. His heart skipped a beat. She looked nervous but also determined. She handed the letter to him, her fingers trembling. She said she had carried it for too long and now it was time. Keanu took it carefully, almost afraid to open it. The envelope felt heavy, not because of its weight, but because of the years it carried. When he finally opened it, the words inside shook him. It was written with raw honesty, filled with thoughts she had never spoken. She wrote about how much his presence had meant to her, how his kindness had been a light in her darkest days, and how she feared she had missed something precious by letting him go. Her words were filled with admiration, regret, and a hope that someday their paths might cross again. As Keanu finished reading, his eyes grew wet. He folded the letter slowly, holding it close for a moment before looking at her. He told her that if he had read it back then, it might have changed everything, but even now it meant the world to him. Sandra's eyes filled with tears as she whispered that she was scared of what could have been lost, but grateful for what was still here. They sat in silence. The park filled with the laughter of children in the distance. Life moved around them, but in that moment, it felt as if time had stopped. Keanu reached out, gently taking her hand. He didn't say much because some emotions are too deep for words. But as the quiet settled, an unexpected twist arrived. A stranger approached them, a journalist who had recognized them. The journalist smiled politely but asked if they were back together. Sandra froze, her hand still in Keanu's. Keanu, calm but firm, simply replied that some moments are not meant for stories, they are meant for hearts. The journalist left, but the interruption reminded them both that the world outside would always try to take pieces of their private moments. That night, Keanu thought about the letter again. He realized that their reunion was not just about remembering the past. It was about rewriting their present. But he also knew that new challenges were coming. The world had already noticed them, and attention was a storm neither of them wanted. Still, deep inside, he felt a quiet strength rising. Maybe this time, they could face it together. The days after the letter felt different. Keanu carried it with him everywhere, folded neatly in his jacket pocket like a piece of time he didn't want to lose. Every time he touched it, he remembered the trembling in Sandra's voice when she gave it to him. It was more than words on paper. It was proof that the years had not erased the bond between them. Yet the weight of the world outside was already pressing in. Paparazzi had begun to follow them. Headlines appeared in magazines, suggesting stories neither of them wanted. Some called it a reunion, others speculated about romance. But neither Keanu nor Sandra spoke publicly. They valued their truth too much to let strangers write it for them. Still, the whispers made Sandra uneasy. She told Keanu she was afraid the world would twist something pure into something shallow. Keanu listened, his calm presence grounding her. But deep inside, he knew she was right. One evening, to escape the noise, Sandra invited him to her home. It was simple, warm, filled with books and photographs of family and friends. As Keanu walked through the quiet rooms, he felt something rare, a sense of peace. They sat in her living room. No cameras, no spotlight, just two souls sharing the kind of silence that heals. She poured him tea and asked if he ever wondered what life might have been like if they had chosen differently all those years ago. Keanu smiled softly, saying that sometimes he thought about it, but he also believed life brings people together when the time is right. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Sandra hesitated before opening it. Standing there was an old friend of hers, visibly upset. She explained that she had come because she had no one else to turn to. Her personal life was falling apart and she needed support. Sandra welcomed her in, offering comfort without hesitation. Keanu watched silently, his heart moved by Sandra's instinct to help. He realized again that her kindness was not for show, it was who she was. Later that night, when the friend left, Sandra sank into the couch, exhausted. She told Keanu that sometimes she felt like she gave too much of herself, and that it left her empty. Keanu leaned forward, his voice gentle. He reminded her that giving kindness was never wasted, but he also told her that she deserved the same kindness in return. His words made her eyes fill with tears. She admitted that sometimes she forgot how to let others take care of her. The next morning, Sandra suggested they take a trip away from the city, somewhere quiet where the noise of the world couldn't reach them. Keanu agreed without hesitation. They drove along winding roads until they reached a mountain cabin surrounded by trees and silence. The air was crisp, the view endless. For the first time in weeks, they felt free. In the cabin, they cooked simple meals together, laughed over small mistakes, and spent long hours talking by the fire. The simplicity reminded them of who they truly were beneath fame and expectations. One night, as the fire crackled, Sandra looked at Keanu with an intensity he had not seen before. She said that no matter what the world thought, this connection was real, and she didn't want to let fear steal it away again. Keanu felt the truth of her words sink into his heart. He promised her quietly that he would stand beside her, no matter how heavy the storms became. But storms have a way of arriving when least expected. One afternoon, as they returned from a walk in the woods, Sandra's phone rang. The call left her shaken. It was news about her family. Someone close to her was unwell, and she needed to fly out immediately. Panic rushed through her voice as she explained the situation. Keanu listened, his calm presence steadying her once again. He told her he would go with her, that she didn't have to face it alone. The airport was crowded, and whispers followed them as they walked together. Sandra clutched the letter in her bag, the same one she had given him days earlier, as if it gave her courage. During the flight, she leaned her head against his shoulder, not saying much, but her silence spoke louder than words. Keanu stayed still, letting her know without speaking that he wasn't going anywhere. When they arrived, the family situation was heavier than she had expected. The person she loved was fighting a difficult illness. Sandra's strength wavered, but Keanu stayed close, offering comfort without asking for anything in return. He sat with her in hospital corridors, held her hand during long nights, and reminded her to breathe when the weight grew too heavy. In those difficult days, Sandra saw the depth of his kindness. He wasn't there for the cameras, he wasn't there for the world, he was there for her. One evening, after hours at the hospital, she turned to him and whispered that she had never felt more grateful for someone's presence. Her voice broke when she said that she didn't know how she would have faced this without him. Keanu, with quiet humility, only replied that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is simply not leaving. The challenges brought them closer than they ever expected. Together they faced sleepless nights, quiet fears, and painful truths. Yet through it all, they also found moments of light, a shared smile, a gentle laugh, the quiet relief of knowing they weren't alone. But beneath the closeness, a new tension began to grow. Sandra feared that when this storm passed, life would pull them apart again. She confessed this one night, her voice trembling, her eyes filled with tears. Keanu listened carefully, then told her that maybe the only way to protect something real was not to run from it. As they held on to each other, the world outside kept moving. But inside their hearts, something unshakable was forming. Something that no headline, no storm, and no fear could easily destroy. The hospital days stretched on, and each one tested Sandra's strength. Her loved one fought bravely, and though the outcome was uncertain, the weight of it left her soul weary. Yet through every dark corridor, every sleepless night, Keanu never left her side. He carried bags of food when she forgot to eat. He poured coffee into her hands when exhaustion blurred her eyes. And most importantly, he gave her silence when words were too heavy. One night, when the hospital halls were empty and the world seemed to pause, Sandra broke down. She sat in the corner of a quiet waiting room, her face buried in her hands, whispering that she didn't know if she had the strength to keep going. Keanu knelt beside her, his hand steady on her shoulder. His voice was calm, steady, almost like a prayer. He told her that strength isn't about never falling, it's about standing back up again, even when everything hurts. She lifted her eyes to him, tears spilling down her face, and whispered that she had always admired his quiet resilience. She said she finally understood why the world saw him as more than an actor. He was a man who carried kindness like a shield, even in his own pain. Keanu's throat tightened, but he simply squeezed her hand, letting her know that he was with her, not just for this moment, but for as long as life would allow. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, her loved one's condition began to improve. The doctors gave cautious hope, and the shadow that had hovered over them began to lift. Sandra's relief was overwhelming. She cried openly, her hands trembling, as she hugged Keanu tightly in the hallway. In that embrace, she felt not just gratitude, but a truth she had long avoided. She needed him, not as a friend she could see once in a while, but as someone who belonged in her life in a deeper, unshakable way. After leaving the hospital, they returned to the quiet cabin in the mountains. It felt like the world had given them space to breathe again. One evening, as the fire burned low and the night sky stretched endlessly above, Sandra finally spoke the words she had carried for years. She told Keanu that she regretted not holding on to him when she had the chance long ago, but she didn't want to live with regret anymore. Her voice was trembling, but her honesty was clear. She wanted to hold on to him now. Keanu looked at her for a long moment, his eyes reflecting both pain and warmth. Then, with a quiet smile, he said he had waited his whole life to hear those words. He admitted that he too had carried unspoken feelings, hidden under years of silence and respect. He told her that he never blamed her for the past, because sometimes people meet at the wrong time, but sometimes life gives them a second chance at the right time. They sat in silence for a long while, hands intertwined, both knowing that this was no longer about the past or what could have been. It was about the present, about choosing kindness, trust, and courage together. But life had one more test for them. The next morning, the media discovered their mountain hideaway. Helicopters circled, reporters gathered, and headlines exploded with speculation. Sandra panicked, fearing that their private bond would be destroyed by the noise of the outside world. Keanu, calm as ever, placed his hands on her shoulders and looked into her eyes. He told her that they couldn't control the world, but they could control their truth. He said that as long as they stood together, the noise outside could never silence what they had built inside. His words gave her strength. Together they walked out of the cabin that day, not hiding, not pretending, but simply standing side by side. They didn't need to explain themselves, because their presence spoke louder than any headline. In the months that followed, their connection grew deeper. They traveled quietly, visited old friends, and returned often to the little school in the village where Sandra had once taken Keanu. The children there loved them, not because of who they were on screens, but because of the kindness they carried in their eyes. One afternoon at that school, as the children played in the field, Sandra looked at Keanu and whispered that she had never felt more at peace. He smiled gently and replied that peace is rare. But when it finds us, we must hold it tightly. And so, their story was not about fame, not about the noise of the world, but about something simpler and more powerful. It was about two souls who had walked through storms, carried regrets, and faced loneliness, yet still found the courage to open their hearts again. Their reunion was not just a meeting of old friends. It was a reminder to the world that respect, humility, resilience, and kindness are timeless. And sometimes, the greatest love stories are not the ones written in grand gestures, but the ones whispered in quiet rooms, carried in simple acts of care, and sealed by the decision to never let go again.